Chapter 19, Adjustment Center. When I got shipped back to San Quentin, they sent me to the Adjustment Center, AC, which is almost exclusively a disciplinary lockup for death row inmates. It's basically their hole, or I'd say. Validated condemned inmates are housed there permanently as well. East Block is similar to their main line, and the AC is where they're housed when they commit a major rule violation such as an assault, a stabbing, or even unpermitted sexual conduct in the visiting room with female visitors. Death row has contact visits, so this was a common occurrence before they installed small individual cages in the visiting room. A regular ADSEG inmate such as myself was usually housed in East Block, but on some occasions we'd be housed in the AC if they determined we had too much influence, if we committed an assault, or sometimes just as a temporary overflow. The AC is a small, shadowy 3-story building that sits between the chapel and North Block. Each tier has a total of 16 cells, 3 tiers on chapel side and 3 tiers on yard side. At this time, we were assigned to one of 5 yards: integrated, Northern Mexican, Northern Black, Southern Mexican White, or one of the 2 Crip yards. There was a split amongst the Crips, so the Crips were out there with either Stanley Tookie Williams, or on the other yard with Taekwon Fee Cox and the other Crips who refused to conform with Tookie. There were only a couple of other Northerners in the AC at the time, so most of our yard were African American death row inmates who were affiliated with the Black Guerrilla Family, BGF. Freddie Yero Ascari Taylor and Jarvis Left Hand Masters were the 2 standout BGF members that I gotten really close to. Yero had always talked about the possibility of writing a book and putting me in it, but as fate would have it, he was the one who obviously ended up in mine. Didn't quite imagine that I'd ever be writing one like this, but I guess that's just the way the cookie crumbled. Guys were solid, stoic believers whom I had wholeheartedly respected and had actually learned to trust more than I did some of my own people. These guys were soldiers and wouldn't hesitate to resort to violence, but I also got to know their personal sides, which made it inconceivable to believe that they had ever committed acts that warranted the death penalty. Yero Ascari picked up a death sentence in Richmond, California, and Left Hand was sentenced to death for his alleged role in spearing a sergeant to death in another part of the prison. One of the Northerners on the yard with me was an NR member by the name of Leo Cano out of San Jose. He had just been convicted for slashing the throat of Gabriel Reaper Coronado, who was a self-proclaimed F-14er out of Fresno. Cano befriended Reaper while they were in the Santa Clara County Jail together. When the orders came to hit him, Cano walked up behind Coronado while he was using the phone and slit his throat from ear to ear. He was subsequently indicted in the early 90s with a multitude of other NF and NR members that included some of the leadership and others who were facing the death penalty for a string of NF-related homicides on the streets of San Jose. Cano was older than me and had been exposed to a lot of in-depth NR schooling. I took full advantage of this, absorbing what I could while there with him. One day, while we were on the yard together, I inadvertently stumbled across a valuable piece of information while we were talking. When my father was murdered in San Jose back in the early 80s, I never heard much about the details of who was involved and exactly what happened, only bits and pieces. One of my cousins told me that he heard that the guy who allegedly killed my father was named Pablo Peña. This name stuck with me ever since then, and I never forgot it. As Cano told me about some of the NF leadership and its history, he mentioned the name Pablo Peña and that he'd been convicted of a murder on the east side of San Jose about the same time my father was killed. Cano said they called this guy Pantera, who is now a high-ranking NF member. Allegedly, Pantera, a female who set the whole thing up, and another guy planned to rob my father after being told that he was a large-scale PCP dealer who kept large amounts of cash stashed at his house. My father sold PCP, but he was a small-time dealer who sold nothing bigger than half grams. As the trio went to rob him, a struggle ensued and my father was shot in the head. His wife at the time, Kathy, ran out to the front porch and found him lying in a pool of his own blood with a fatal head wound. She watched him take his last few breaths. This ultimately ended up traumatizing her, and to this day, I've never seen or heard from her again. She took my two baby sisters and my younger brother and moved away. So here I was, almost 10 years later, aspiring to be an NF member, and come to find out that these were the same people who allegedly killed my father. It was definitely an unexpected twist of fate. Strange as it may sound, it still didn't change my resolve. I just looked at it as being an unfortunate set of circumstances. I didn't see the NF as a whole as being responsible for this. It was just one individual who happened to be affiliated with the NF. At least that's how I justified it in my mind. A couple months later, I was put back on a bus, and once again, I took that long, dreaded ride back to Pelican Bay. This time, I bypassed the orientation unit in C1 and went straight to C5. I sailed up with another NR member that caught the bus with me by the name of Rudy Chavez from San Pablo. To my surprise, we got lucky because we landed in a pod with two NR members and two NF members. NF member George Puppet Franco from San Jose and NR member Tony Mendoza from Yuba City were below us. And in the bottom corner by the yard was NF member Louis Big Roach Aroche and his younger brother, NR member Eddie Little Roach Aroche from San Francisco. What were the chances that I'd end up in the same pod with the Roach brothers from my hood in this whole shoe program? It was pure luck. All I kept thinking about was the last time I met Little Roach at La Raza Park when I spoke with him and Dreamer about Duck and Marlene. Little Roach still didn't know that I kept my finger on the trigger of a fully loaded 44 semi-automatic during the entire conversation. But a couple of weeks later, I told him and we laughed about it. After me and Rudy were cleared, we spent the next couple of months working with Big Roach on a number of NR-related topics, all surrounding street activities. We started from the ground up, and by the time I got ready to parole, I knew all the street formats like the back of my hand. I had yet to get any real hands-on experience, but I knew how to build a regiment, scout and recruit manpower, delegate my chain of command, compartmentalize my crews, generate money, and all the internal workings from a leadership perspective. Big Roach was preparing me to work hand in hand with Little Roach, but when his parole date came up, Santa Clara County slapped a detainer on him for a double homicide that he allegedly committed with Dreamer. They were accused of killing NR member Federico Arevalo and Barry San Jose, both of San Francisco. Apparently, Little Roach and Dreamer were upset with Federico because he was selling large amounts of PCP in San Francisco and was refusing to kick the regiment down some of his profits. They felt like he was using his sales for personal gain and that he should be held accountable for not working with them. Additionally, he made some mistakes while he was in prison that followed him. In early July 1992, members from the San Francisco, San Jose, and Salinas regiments called a meeting to hold a vote whether or not to take him out. The vote was unanimous and a plan was hatched. On July 19, 1992, Federico called NR member Albert Beto Guillen from San Jose and made arrangements to meet him in San Jose for the purpose of purchasing an ounce of PCP. Fellow NR member Gilbert Gibby Garcia accompanied Beto and alerted the hit squad, which included Little Roach and Dreamer, that Federico was on his way out there. What was supposed to be a dope deal ended up being a ruse by the regiments to lure him to his death. When Federico and Barry pulled up into an area by Lockridge and Berrywood Drives, they were attacked and shot multiple times. Barry became an inconsequential collateral damage because he was the only uninvolved witness. He had no idea what was going on and had only given Federico a ride. As I was gearing up to parole, my last phase of schooling centered around communication and devising different codes to avoid detection by the institutional gang investigators, IGI, monitoring the mail at Pelican Bay. This was for me and Big Roach to discuss street biz and communicate effectively. Big Roach was my primary channel, and NF leader James Conejo Perez from Sacramento was my backup channel. Conejo was the overall authority in charge of the regiment and was working hand in hand with the Street Regiment General, SRG, who was overseeing all the organization's street affairs. NF leader Sheldon Skip Villanueva was in C4 and was acting as a liaison to the SRG. Big Roach was just Conejo's buffer. I paroled in October 1994 and went back to San Francisco with directives to reestablish the Street Regiment. This was the first time I really became proactive in working on the streets and had my training put to the test. I managed to get a small crew working under me and had located some of the brothers who dispersed after Little Roach and Dreamer got arrested. At the time, crank wasn't really popular on the streets of San Francisco yet, and I really didn't have the clientele for it. But crack, heroin, and powder cocaine were still lucrative, so that's what I invested in. Although I was determined to generate money for the regiment and prove I could still be productive, I still had a penchant for targeting sureños. By now, I knew better and had been schooled against it, but it was something that had become so ingrained within me, I had to grow out of it on my own. I despised those fools and just couldn't bring myself to stop taking flight on them whenever I see them. Even though I wasn't contributing any real substantial amounts of money to the organization yet, I still maintained steady contact with both Conejo and Big Roach. In December 1994, I got Connie pregnant. I was excited about it as we had been trying unsuccessfully for the past year. I used to go to all the doctor's appointments with her, and I was just happy about the prospect of raising a child. I wasn't involved in my son's life, but I would be there to raise this child. I would even be there at the hospital to watch Connie give birth. At least that's what I was hoping. However, in February 1995, I slipped up and made another costly mistake. At the time, I began selling small amounts of PCP on the side to make extra money, and usually kept 2 to 3 joints on me just in case I ran into somebody that wanted it. PCP was actually something that Connie and I would fight about, and I didn't want to make a habit out of keeping it around. But there was a large clientele for it in the city. Connie wasn't a dope fiend. She was a good girl, but she'd occasionally smoke PCP with her homegirls, and this enraged me. If I knew she was high on this shit after coming home from partying with her girls, I'd get physically abusive because I couldn't stand to see her like that. But I was being a big hypocrite based on the fact that I indulged in heroin myself. But that's just the way I was dealing with it. One night, Connie, one of her friends, and I were down at Pier 39, and I uncharacteristically gave them one of my joints. I never really liked this shit and didn't find the high enjoyable, but at their insistence, I took a couple quick hits and let them smoke the rest. The following day, I got an unexpected phone call from my parole officer telling me to stop by the office and check in. I had just tested a couple days before, so I didn't think he'd bottle me again, but my parole officer was unpredictable and I didn't trust him. I didn't want to take any chances, especially since Connie was pregnant. So I had one of my little nephews piss in a bottle and I tried to foil the test. Prior to going into the parole office, I taped a bag of piss under my left arm and connected a fish tank hose to the bottom of the bag. This way, I could release a valve during the test and provide clean urine. But I raised his suspicion by shuffling around with it too much and ended up getting caught. Now this put me in a worse situation because not only was I going to get violated for trying to deceive the test, but also for giving a dirty bottle. Me and my parole officer never saw eye to eye and got off to a bad start from day one. I knew he'd violate me every chance he got, and this time was definitely no different. However, to my surprise, he told me he'd only give me a 30-day dryout and that I'd be back out on the streets the same time the following month. That didn't sound bad at all. I could do 30 days standing on my head. The most important thing was that I make it back out with plenty of time to see Connie have our baby.